The mail slipped through the slot with a faint metallic thud, the kind of sound that usually went unnoticed. I barely glanced at the usual pile of bills and flyers, letting them settle on the kitchen counter, until one envelope caught my eye. It was crisp, almost pristine, with an official weight that demanded attention. I picked it up, feeling the subtle texture of the paper, the faint scent of wax and ink lingering in the folds, a smell that was deliberate, intentional, almost ceremonial. I unfolded the document slowly, as if careful handling could protect me from whatever truth lay within. And then I saw it. My aunt's signature sprawled across forms I'd never authorized. My stomach dropped, and the air in the apartment seemed to thin, colder somehow, as though the sunlight that had been streaming through the window was now just a faint shadow. Every line I read whispered betrayal. Every word reminded me of the trust I had placed in her. In that moment, the realization hit me like ice. Someone had stolen my inheritance, quietly, methodically. And it wasn't just the money they had taken. It was the sense of safety, of certainty, of dignity that I had long assumed was untouchable. I knew then, without a shadow of doubt, that I had to fight, not just for the cash, but to reclaim what had been quietly erased from my life. Before I go any further, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of these slow-burning courtroom stories. And I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted completely? Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. If you want to see how I fought back and reclaimed what was mine, stay with me, because what happens next isn't just about money. It's about justice, patience, and taking control of your life. Growing up, my aunt had always carried herself as the responsible one, the one everyone turned to when the family teetered on the edge of chaos. She smiled in that practiced, comforting way, offering advice and reassurances that felt warm on the surface. But beneath it all, there was an undercurrent of control, a subtle sense of superiority. It was the kind of power that doesn't announce itself with force, but quietly commands the room, shaping every conversation, every decision. She didn't just manage the family finances, she owned the narrative around them. And I had been nothing more than a bystander in my own inheritance, a passive observer told that my portion would be managed wisely, while she handled every paper, every signature, every account with meticulous precision. I remember evenings in our childhood home, the amber glow of lamps casting soft shadows across the living room walls. The faint, comforting scent of vanilla mingled with the musky aroma of old books stacked on the shelves. My aunt always sat at the center of it all, her posture relaxed but commanding, a quiet gravity in her gaze. The rest of us orbited her words, laughing when she smiled, nodding when she advised. At the time, it felt safe, almost cozy. But looking back now, I realized that atmosphere had a weight to it, a subtle suffocation that I hadn't recognized as a child. Years later, when I began examining bank statements and legal notices more carefully, the comforting illusion crumbled. Patterns emerged, transactions far larger than necessary, accounts shifted under names I barely recognized, funds quietly siphoned away. Each discovery chipped away at the life I had assumed was mine by right. The stakes were no longer abstract ideas or distant possibilities. They were real. $150,000 had vanished, and with it, a sense of security I had taken for granted. Every time I tried to question her, I was met with that same gentle smile, that soft, dismissive tone that hit a sharp, almost imperceptible edge. The emotional cost was deeper than money. It was years of quiet disempowerment, subtle manipulation that left me doubting my own instincts, questioning not just her loyalty, but the trust I'd placed in the family as a whole. It was a slow erosion, almost invisible, until I had nothing left but evidence and a gnawing certainty that the person I had trusted most had been orchestrating my loss all along. That realization set the stage for everything that would come after. Every careful calculation, every strategic decision, every step toward reclaiming what was rightfully mine. The fight was no longer about money alone. It was about truth, control, and finally asserting my own voice in a story that had been hijacked long before I knew it existed. I decided I couldn't leave it to chance. Quietly, I began to document everything. Late nights became my ritual. The apartment was dimly lit by a single desk lamp, its warm glow barely cutting through the surrounding darkness. The hum of the city outside was distant, almost comforting, as the steam from my coffee curled lazily into the faint light. Each sip felt grounding, a small anchor in the growing storm. I started cataloging every detail. Transactions that didn't make sense, forms I had never signed, emails that hinted at decisions being made without my knowledge. The patterns were subtle at first. Funds rerouted under seemingly innocuous account names, minor misstatements in legal documents that could easily pass unnoticed. Yet the more I observed, the clearer it became. Each irregularity was a deliberate move, a carefully calculated maneuver designed to keep me blind. Fear crept in with every discovery, but it was matched equally by determination. I realized that I wasn't just tracking money, I was tracing betrayal, reconstructing the quiet manipulation of years. Friends reached out, offering sympathy, concern, the kind of comfort I had always thought I would appreciate. But I didn't want pity. I wanted action. I wanted clarity. Each night, as the apartment darkened around me and the clock ticked steadily, I felt my resolve harden. The comfort of ignorance was gone. I had awakened to the scope of her deception. Then came the first major break. A small, seemingly trivial bank notice, a statement tucked among routine updates, hinted at an account I had never authorized. My pulse jumped, a sharp rhythm that echoed in my chest as I cross-referenced it with past statements. The numbers didn't just misalign, they told a story, a quiet theft orchestrated over years. Every transaction, every shift, every unexplained movement of funds now formed a map of deliberate concealment. It was like peeling back layers of a carefully constructed illusion. What I had once accepted as routine family management was actually a web of subtle manipulation and control. My inheritance was not just missing. It had been systematically laundered, hidden in plain sight behind legalese and polite explanations. I felt a mix of anger, disbelief, and a strange, cold satisfaction in finally understanding the truth. The inciting event had arrived. Undeniable proof that my aunt had acted with intent, diverting what was rightfully mine. It was a moment of revelation, sharp and unflinching, that crystallized everything I had been feeling for months. I knew then that there was no turning back. The confrontation, when it came, would be deliberate, precise, and calculated, just as she had planned every step of her deception. In that dimly lit apartment, surrounded by stacks of documents and the quiet aroma of coffee, I understood the magnitude of what I faced. This wasn't merely about reclaiming money, it was about reclaiming authority over my life, over my future. The theft had been methodical, but so would my response. And in the quiet, reflective hours of that night, I began to prepare, not with haste or emotion, but with meticulous resolve, every step bringing me closer to exposing the truth. The next step was legal, a step I had delayed too long out of disbelief and hesitation. I sought advice from an attorney whose reputation for handling family fraud cases was meticulous, almost surgical. Our meetings were held in sterile offices bathed in sunlight, the faint aroma of leather and ink hanging in the air like an unspoken promise of justice. Every document we prepared felt like the careful laying of stones in a foundation, each signature a quiet, deliberate victory. The weight of preparation was heavy, but it grounded me. For the first time, the chaos of betrayal began to feel manageable. Communicating with my aunt became an exercise in restraint. Her calls, usually casual and warm, carried that same patronizing tone I had grown up with, a carefully polished mask that had fooled everyone but me. I had to mask my anger, speak with neutral tones, even as my mind cataloged every slip, every hesitation in her words. Behind her practiced warmth, I began to notice subtle cracks. Conversations that had once been effortless for her now carried hints of urgency, hurried explanations, and small contradictions that no one else seemed to catch. At family gatherings, her laughter occasionally faltered, and I could detect a subtle tension in her gestures, anxiety barely concealed beneath a veneer of composure. Evidence became my silent ally. I collected it systematically. Detailed bank records, notarized letters, sworn affidavits from those who had witnessed her manipulations, and any paper trail that hinted at the extent of her control. Nights were spent cross-referencing statements, verifying dates, and connecting dots she had thought invisible. The work was painstaking, but every verified fact became a sharpened tool in my hands. I was no longer the passive observer of my own life. Each piece of evidence reinforced the reality that this was deliberate, calculated, and undeniable. In parallel, I began preparing myself emotionally for what was to come. The process demanded a kind of calm I had never practiced before, a patience to wait for the right moment, and the foresight to anticipate her next move. I rehearsed phone calls, responses, and even potential courtroom interactions in the quiet of my apartment, often sitting alone in dim lamplight while the city hummed softly outside my window. Each rehearsal, each careful plan chipped away at the fear that had once paralyzed me. The tension built gradually, almost imperceptibly, but it was there, like a taut wire stretched between two fixed points. I could sense that the inevitable confrontation was approaching. Her habitual control, so long exercised over my life, was starting to falter under the weight of evidence I now held. I felt my confidence grow with each new discovery and each small victory in preparation. No longer the wronged relative quietly simmering with resentment. I was becoming a calculated force, methodical and resolute, ready to reclaim what was rightfully mine. By the time the legal paperwork was complete, I was transformed. The fear that had accompanied each subtle deception, each manipulative smile, had been replaced with a quiet certainty. I had a strategy, proof, and patience, 3 tools more powerful than any anger could provide. I knew the confrontation would test every ounce of composure I had cultivated, but I was ready. The groundwork had been laid, the stage set, and all that remained was the moment when truth and accountability would meet face to face. This period of quiet strategy, of planning and observation, was more than just preparation for court. It was preparation for myself. I had learned to control my own narrative, to reclaim my voice, and to transform fear into precision. The transformation was subtle but profound. From someone disempowered and betrayed into someone steady, deliberate, and unstoppable. Each documented fact, each notarized letter, and each carefully prepared affidavit was a step closer to restoring not just my inheritance, but my dignity, my voice, and my sense of justice. I could feel it then, in the steady rhythm of my heartbeat and the focused calm in my mind. The confrontation was coming, and when it did, I would not just speak, I would prove. And that proof would be undeniable. Courtroom lights glinted sharply off polished wood panels, their glare reflecting in the calm yet tense atmosphere that hung like a weight over everyone present. My aunt sat across from me, her posture rigid, hands folded neatly on the table as if rehearsed. The judge's gavel rested nearby, a heartbeat away from silence, a final punctuation waiting for the truth to emerge. The air itself felt charged, thick with anticipation, each breath carrying the unspoken gravity of years of betrayal and careful preparation. Soft murmurs echoed from the back rows, whispers of curiosity that seemed to hang in suspension, part of the tension that made my pulse quicken and my palms sweat, though I kept them still, composed. I laid out the evidence with deliberate care, every sheet a weighty revelation, each document a testament to painstaking nights spent unraveling deception. Bank statements detailed rerouted funds, Minor manipulations that together formed a clear and undeniable pattern. Notarized letters and sworn affidavits built the framework of my argument, proof that no casual mistake or oversight could explain. Every page I placed before the court was a story in itself, a narrative of betrayal written in numbers and signatures. The room seemed to lean in, silent spectators to a truth that had long simmered beneath polite family interactions. As I spoke, recounting each transaction and subtle deception, my voice remained steady and calm, even as my heart thumped beneath my ribs. I described how funds were siphoned through innocuous accounts, how minor misstatements in legal documents disguised months of calculated rerouting. I detailed every instance where trust had been broken, every moment when her polite smiles and reassurances masked careful manipulation. My words, measured and precise, cut through the weight of tension like a scalpel, carving the reality of betrayal into the consciousness of the court. Across the table, my aunt fidgeted imperceptibly at first, a slight tapping of her fingers, a restless shifting in her seat. Her practiced smile faltered in the quiet gravity of the moment. For the first time in years, the facade she had maintained so carefully began to crumble. I observed the subtle anxiety that betrayed her composure, a fleeting glance at her attorney, a slight tightening of her jaw, a hesitant pause before answering a question. These were the cracks I had anticipated, the silent admissions of guilt that no words could fully hide. The defining moment arrived almost imperceptibly. I presented a notarized letter proving an unapproved transfer. An account moved without my knowledge, a sum far larger than minor discrepancies could explain. The courtroom seemed to still in that instant. Even the clock on the wall appeared to pause, as though the universe itself recognized the significance of the revelation. Silence enveloped the room, a vacuum that amplified the gravity of what had just been revealed. My aunt opened her mouth, seeking deflection, an excuse, a polite explanation, but the layers of deception she had built so carefully over the years were stripped away in a single, undeniable piece of evidence. Her attempts at deflection faltered under the weight of corroborated facts. Every minor contradiction I had documented, every inconsistency, every subtle manipulation, now stood as a monument to careful planning that could not withstand the scrutiny of truth. The judge's eyes shifted between us, absorbing the magnitude of the evidence with a calm authority that carried the promise of justice. For a brief moment, the room held its collective breath, the tension stretching taut as if the air itself anticipated the verdict. I felt a quiet sense of resolve settle in me, the culmination of months of painstaking work and careful observation. There was no room for anger or theatrics. My strategy had always been measured, precise. My calm, deliberate recounting of fact created a contrast against the faltering composure of my aunt, and in that contrast lay the power of the moment. I realized that the battle had never been about confrontation in loud accusations, but about careful presentation of undeniable truth. Justice, I understood, was procedural as much as it was moral. Finally, the verdict was delivered. The court ordered the return of my $150K inheritance. The words hung in the air like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, relief washing over me, mingling with triumph. The restoration of what had been stolen was not just financial. It was deeply personal. Every ounce of quiet strength, every sleepless night spent cataloging and cross-referencing evidence had culminated in this moment. I felt the weight lift from my chest, the years of subtle disempowerment dissipating in the clarity of justice served. The courtroom, once heavy with tension, now seemed almost luminous. Observers who had murmured in curiosity now exchanged glances of acknowledgement, the magnitude of what had transpired settling quietly over the room. My aunt sat back, defeated, her polished facade reduced to the barest acknowledgement of truth. I did not gloat. There was no need. The law, impartial and unyielding, had spoken. My inheritance was returned, but more importantly, my dignity and personal agency were restored. As I gathered my belongings to leave, I felt a subtle but profound shift within myself. The months of fear, anxiety, and meticulous preparation had forged a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. I had learned not only to defend what was mine, but to reclaim my voice in a family that had long controlled it. The triumph was not loud or dramatic, but quiet, measured, and absolute. Justice had been served, and with it came a profound sense of empowerment, a reminder that careful observation, deliberate action, and unwavering composure could overcome even the most calculated betrayals. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt the sunlight differently, warmer and steadier, as if the world itself acknowledged the restoration of balance. The battle had been long, the path painstaking, but every step had been necessary. What remained now was the quiet satisfaction of truth revealed, trust restored in my own judgment, and the deep, unshakable knowledge that the right course, no matter how slow, had prevailed. Back in my apartment, the city lights flickered softly against the window pane, each pulse of illumination reflecting a quiet sense of accomplishment I had never allowed myself to feel before. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee, its warmth curling from a mug perfectly aligned with my laptop. Documents lay stacked neatly on the desk, each one a reminder of hours spent in patience and meticulous care. Outside, rain tapped a gentle rhythm against the glass, a quiet percussion that mirrored the steady calm I now felt inside. The chaos of betrayal had been replaced with a careful, deliberate order, and in that order, I found something far greater than money: clarity. Winning the case was never just about the $150K. It was about reclaiming control that had been slowly eroded, a restoration of agency that had long been denied. Every signed affidavit, every cross-referenced bank record, every painstaking observation had culminated in this moment. The act of pursuing justice patiently and methodically became a mirror for personal empowerment. I realized that careful observation, calm strategy, and deliberate action were not just tools for legal battles. They were tools for life itself. I thought back to the lessons learned along the way. Trust cautiously, yes, but never let suspicion paralyze action. Act decisively, even when the stakes feel monumental. And perhaps most importantly, never underestimate the subtlety of manipulation, the quiet ways someone can exert control without ever raising their voice. Betrayal had been a shadow in my life, long and persistent, but the court's ruling illuminated the path toward resilience, showing that even the most insidious deceptions can be unraveled with diligence and patience. As I sipped the now lukewarm coffee, I reflected on the quiet transformations I had undergone. The fear and frustration that once accompanied each discovery had been replaced with a composed confidence. I had learned to observe without letting emotion cloud judgment, to act without hesitation, and to find strength in persistence. The courtroom victory, though outwardly about restitution, had been inwardly about reclaiming a piece of myself I hadn't realized was missing. Every step from the first flicker of suspicion to the final verdict had reinforced that justice was not merely an external outcome. It was a state of internal clarity, a realignment of self-worth. Now, with my $150K restored and my dignity intact, I felt an inner calm that was unfamiliar yet deeply satisfying. There was no need for celebration or fanfare. The quiet certainty of right action, the knowledge that patience and meticulous effort could overcome deception, was reward enough. I understood finally that justice, when pursued methodically and without haste, was as much about restoring self-respect as it was about reclaiming what had been taken. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the rain's steady rhythm, and let myself breathe fully. For the first time in months, The betrayal that had once seemed insurmountable now felt like a shadow behind me, no longer looming, no longer defining the boundaries of my life. The city outside continued its endless pulse, indifferent yet somehow affirming, and I felt ready for whatever came next. The lesson was clear. Vigilance, patience, and deliberate action are the quiet engines of resilience, and true empowerment comes not from vengeance, but from reclaiming control over one's own life. If the story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life courtroom stories and slow burn revenge tales. Share it with someone who's ever had to fight for what's rightfully theirs, because justice, patience, and resilience aren't just lessons in courtrooms, they're lessons for life. And remember, your voice matters. Never let betrayal define you.